The NHL released a 19-page document on reopening facilities. So we're almost through the Stanley Cup Finals. And so they're already looking at, okay, so off-season protocols. Keep in mind, more than half the league either hasn't played since March or has played a maximum of 5 games since March. So there's a lot of hockey players out there that haven't been playing hockey, and their conditioning may very well not be exactly where you'd want it to be if you're anticipating being back on the ice, whether that's going to Europe and playing for a while or anticipating a next season from the NHL. So we're permitted. Training facilities can reopen October 15th. There may be certain locations where they're not permitted to reopen with the NHL's regulations as they are. So there's a maximum of 12 players on the ice. If this feels familiar, it's because it's very similar to what they did during the summer. You know, back when everybody said, well, they're not actually going to have playoffs. They're not coming back. Forget it. It's not going to happen. There'll be a 2020-2021 season. So 12 players on the ice at one time maximum, and it's groups. So you've got your group. There will be 2 COVID tests per week, cardiac screening for any players who have had it. So if they do a screening, they find, hey, so this player's had it, or the player comes forward and says, hey, I had it. They'll do some a cardiac screening to make sure that they don't have any kind of a heart issue that can happen afterwards. And they have to have a negative test before they're even allowed on the ice and allowed in the facilities. This is all the same as it was before. This is basically the same procedure, and it worked. It did. I know there were a couple of teams that went through it, St. Louis and Tampa being 2 of those teams that went through it. I know there were other teams that did as well. But in the end, it did work because we're still having a Stanley Cup final. The plan is, again, to disinfect the arena/facilities in between sessions and groups. So Group A comes in and they do their workout and all of that. And then when they leave, you do a full disinfection and sanitization before the next group comes in. Weight training cannot require a spotter. So they're not going to be lifting the big heavy weights, which, guys will do. I bet you can't lift 500 pounds. Bet you I can't either. But can you spot me? Because I don't want to die. So there won't be any of that going on. But there will be strength training. They will be allowed to be in the gym and again, get themselves in shape. Because, again, we're going to look at, a team like Tampa, Dallas, Vegas, the Islanders and say, wow, this could be really a short turnaround if they did have the season start when they said they would, which now they aren't. But whatever. The idea that you're going to have this short turnaround. But there's these other players that haven't played for like 6.5 months. So that's a long time to go between games. These guys are getting kind of antsy and anxious, and rightfully so, because that's a long time. I've mentioned this before, but this isn't the same as a lockout, because during a lockout, yeah, they could still all hang out together and they could still go out on the ice, and they still did like charity games and things like that, and they were still playing hockey, just not for the National Hockey League. And this has been different that way. This is a completely unique environment where guys may not have been on the ice for 6 months. I think most of them have by now, but there may be some that haven't yet. There's no sharing of personal items. 6 feet required between them when they're off the ice. So again, this is just to minimize close contact and take steps that we've seen do work. The distancing works. Everything else that we've looked at, it does work when it's properly followed. There will be no media, no player agents, no performance personnel, so that's trainers, or players' families allowed into the facilities. So this again is about minimizing the amount of required tests, minimizing exposure, and making sure that you keep this nice closed environment while they're still going to exist in the real world. And they're still going to be, doing stuff, but they're still keeping things safe without actually being in a bubble. And there is no discussion of, and it doesn't look like there will be a bubble, and I think other sports might be showing that could be okay. The facilities in the cities were allowed, so again, it has to be where the local health professionals say, yeah, you can open that. They will be open 7 days after 5 or more players state that they basically plan to come into town to do some off-season training. So it's not an official training camp. It's nothing organized, but I guarantee you there's going to be some teams that haven't played in a while that are going to want to see some guys on the ice, and some guys for those teams are going to want to get on the ice and see the guys and have that camaraderie moment back. So they'll be required to open up. And of course, there's a 14-day quarantine entering Canada. We know this. So players will not be exempt from that coming in for off-season training. And the NHL will impose it if they use public transportation to get in. So if you want to get in and not have to worry about quarantining, you have to charter your own jet. You fly in on a public flight, which I think most will, if you come in on a public train. And I thought it was nice that they included trains. I thought, I don't know how many people are going to be using trains to get to a training camp, but, I guess. And, of course, I guess even just taking the bus in. So, there's probably going to be some players making some nice road trips, but if you're coming in from Europe, that's probably not an option. The hydro cars never really took off. Back in the 70s, we all expected all these really cool flying and hydro cars. Nope. Another reason to be disappointed in 2020. And there are many. There are many reasons to be disappointed in 2020. So, September, I want to talk about other leagues here too, because we discussed this and now the NHL is doing things. So I want to discuss the other leagues and what's going on. The NFL, from September 13th to 19th, they conducted over 7,000 tests and had 0 positives. So this is important. Major League Baseball last week, when they revealed their results, they had 2. So early on in Major League Baseball season, we had major outbreaks with the Marlins and the Cardinals. And both of those were traced back to some questionable choices being made by players. And so again, this is one of those things where if you don't make those questionable choices as a hockey player, if you're not going out to big parties, you're not, hanging out in huge gatherings, and if you're keeping yourself safe, and it's about hand washing and social distancing and all that other stuff, you can probably make it so you don't have to worry about, coming down with this, passing it along to your family, passing it along to a coach, to a trainer. Remember, these guys are young, but trainers and coaches aren't always so young. So the idea of you may be fine, but people in your life may not be, that's important right now too. But yeah, after those outbreaks, it felt like that might shut the season down, and there were plenty of people saying probably not going to make it. I didn't think they'd make it through a season. I felt that without some kind of a bubble, that especially when the outbreaks happened, I thought, well, they're not going to have a World Series champion. And yet it looks like right now, with where we're at, they'll have a World Series champion. And they plan to have fans in attendance for both the League Championship Series and the World Series. I don't know how that's going to work. I'm being honest. I don't know how that's going to work. I don't know if you're going to have half attendance, 25% attendance. But there are some NFL teams as well that are toying with we're going to have fans and this amount. And of course, California's not allowing it, but other teams are. We're going to see in the NHL, I would think, some arenas allowed to have fans and some not. Look at Dallas right now. Dallas is having watch parties for the Dallas Stars against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And again, what we've seen is that if people are smart and if people take the right precautions, you don't have to worry about massive outbreaks and massive issues. But that's something that I guarantee you Gary Bettman's looking at. I guarantee you Gary Bettman right now is looking at those watch parties in Dallas and saying, okay, how many people do they have in that building? How far apart are they spaced? And what is the health data going to show us afterwards? And if everything looks good after that, I guarantee you he's going to look for a template, whether it's from another sport or if it's from a city like Dallas that's, saying, hey, we can have some fans in attendance. It's not full, but we can have some. It would make a huge difference. It would make a huge difference even if you had 1,000 fans in attendance for the games that we're having in the Stanley Cup Final. It would sound bizarre to only have 1,000 people, but it would sound less bizarre than having piped in crowd noise. So, and I know as a and again, I mentioned this in other videos, as a wrestling fan, when you see, like, for instance, AEW has some real, some fans in attendance, and again, it's trying to keep things as safe as possible. It makes a big difference, even just having a few, comparatively speaking, to what you would normally have. So I think the NHL's looking at that. They're looking at ways to do it safely, and a way to make sure that you can have that balance. And then as the season goes along, the anticipation would be you could have more fans in attendance down the road. Now, again, people will mention, and they're right, they don't have a Canadian border problem in the NFL. They don't have one at all. Major League Baseball, Toronto moved to Buffalo. Problem solved. And in Major League Soccer, There are Canadian teams that are currently south of the border for similar reasons, being the Canadian border. I would not rule out, and I know this sounds odd, I would not rule out Canadian teams in the NHL starting south of the border. I'm not, and I'm just throwing that out there because I guarantee you someone somewhere is going to discuss this and say maybe for the first month of the season we'd like to have some fans in attendance. We'd like to do it as safely as possible. We've seen other leagues do it, but the 14-day quarantine in Canada doesn't work for us, and the government will not work with us in order to facilitate this happening. So they would then look to interesting markets, I would think. And this is where that debate then starts, where maybe the NHL says we can take the Canadian teams because we can't have fans in attendance and the quarantine doesn't work. We could park one in Houston. We could park one in Milwaukee. We could park these teams into locations that keeps them geographically in the same the same division, and it makes sense. But we could also sort of be testing the waters about what other markets might really support hockey. Where do people get excited that there's an NHL team in town? Again, I'm just spitballing because people will be doing this between now and the start of next season. The idea of how you have a season, how you have it safely. The NFL seems to have it figured out. I did not anticipate that being a thing. They didn't have a preseason. They really minimized contact between players before the season started. There were various outbreaks that were reported, and I thought this isn't going to work. But so far, we're only 2 weeks in. So far, so good. So we'll see what happens with the NFL in week 3, and I guarantee you the NHL is watching, and the NHL will be watching European leagues. Again, as I mentioned in the News of the Day video today, they will be watching what happens with the KHL and saying, that's what we don't want to do. So this is where we're at. We'll see what happens. And I would anticipate that we'll be hearing news trickling out on what the plan might be and how this will all come together. I would say by the middle of November, they'll have some sort of a game plan that we'll be aware of, and we'll know when the timeline is for starting the season, having the training camps and all of that. And going forward from there. There's been rumors of December 1st, of course, being the ideal date, but maybe that around Christmas time they would start. Keep in mind, that's when the NBA is planning to start up as Christmas Day, and if the NHL starts up a day or two after that, might hurt their ratings. But speaking of ratings, when I talked about TV deals, and I saw comments saying, hey, networks aren't going to pay big money for sports anymore. So the NHL is not going to get money because networks aren't going to pay for sports. The ratings are dropping. Turner just signed a new deal with Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball signed a couple of them, and it's a 40% increase in the income for the league. I think it's like $400 million that they're making overall between these deals. It's a good amount of money, and it starts in 2022. So yes, networks are still putting money in because they know eventually this is going to get better. It's not going to last forever, and people are going to go back to watching sports in the same numbers they were before, and maybe even higher. So Major League Baseball is making more money, and this is off of a shortened 60-game season. That's something else the NHL might look at. Like, okay, so they played a shortened season. They're making more money from the American networks. We could play a shortened schedule, get ourselves back onto the regular October through April schedule, and probably come out of it with a pretty good TV deal as well. Look at maybe a 48-game schedule. Maybe you increase the playoffs. I don't think you do, though, because the other shortened seasons, we didn't need 24 teams having a tournament to decide the 16 teams in the playoffs. I don't think we need to do that now either, but we'll see. And, of course, there's a debate about whether or not owners in Major League Baseball have used this pandemic and shutdown to increase the number of teams in the playoffs to 16, which apparently is the end of the world for baseball fans. I was reading a couple articles on that. I find it cute. That's it. Major League Baseball owners are crazy. How dare you have 16 teams in the playoffs? To which the NBA and the NHL go, yeah, that would be awful, wouldn't it? But again, it's that traditional baseball side of things, and I think the traditional baseball fans, I think they get in the way of the sport actually increasing viewership and increasing interest. And if more teams make the playoffs, more fan bases are going to think they have a chance. And this is something that somebody somewhere is thinking of with the NHL and looking at this here and saying, the 24-team thing might be able to make that work. Even if it's just a best 2 out of 3 wild cards. So anyways, It's going to take a lot to convince owners to do this, but usually it's a money issue. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.